All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and get started looking at world religions today. So my goal for you by the end of this is for you to have a better understanding of religions, of the major religions that have shaped the world. So we'll be looking at Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the three monotheistic faiths. Today we'll also be looking at some polytheistic faiths. We'll look at Hinduism, Buddhism, and also a little bit of Confucianism. So keep that in mind as we're moving forward. Be taking notes. You can do that on pencil and paper, or you're welcome to do that on a computer. But you definitely want to have an understanding of this material. That's why I am making this screencast. All right, let's get started. Okay, so think about you. You might be religious. You might know someone religious. What I want you to look at this graph and understand is that only 14% of the world currently is considered non-religious. They don't consider themselves to believe in something spiritual. They don't believe, or they don't follow a certain belief system, a certain religion's practices, things like that. What this shows us is that for thousands of years, we know that people have been finding meaning in the world through religion. That's something that was a characteristic of civilization. We can recall that it was a characteristic of civilization for people to have developed religion that showed something about them as a group. So keep that in mind. Now, today we've got about 33% of the world Christian, so not the majority, but the largest group. 21% Muslims, they're practicing Islam. 13% Hindu, 5% Buddhist, almost 6% though, and 12 point, almost 5% is practicing some other sort of religion. So that could be Jewish people, of course, that could be some of the other Eastern religions that we'll briefly discuss as well. All right, so let's go ahead and keep that in the back of our mind as we look at our major faiths. So the first one that we will jump into is the oldest monotheistic religion that the world has, and that is Judaism. And if I were in class, we would have a chance to kind of brain dump what is everything that everyone in the class knows about Judaism? What are things that we're familiar with? The Jews, the Jewish faith, what do we already know? You might say things like, oh, Hanukkah. You might say the Holocaust. You might say Moses, precursor to the Christian faith. So you've got some probably pre-knowledge about the Jewish faith. So we'll talk about them first in the course of history. So reminding yourself, we talked briefly about Mesopotamians being the people to originate or to have Judaism originate in their lands. The Hebrews, people that are living in Mesopotamia, they're called Hebrews in this case, the early Jews, they are the ones that first settle into this idea of there is only one God. This is the first time that happens. Previous to this, we had mostly polytheistic faiths. Remember, faiths where people were worshiping multiple gods that were supposed to bring them various blessings. Now here with the Jews, they create a faith. They believe in a faith currently still that has only one God, one superior and supreme being that rules over the whole world and all human actions and human life. Now, this is occurring in about 2000 BC, so 2000 years before Christ or 2000 years before the Common Era. What this means is, think about that. This means the Jewish faith is over 4,000 years old. That's relatively impressive if we consider we really only have a good handle of less than 10,000 years of human history. So Jewish history certainly is a big portion of human history. Now, the story of Judaism, they had their creation story, of course, the same one that is in the Bible, that God has created the world out of nothing. God creates man. Man evolves over time. There are more and more men populating the earth. Eventually, God sees that humans have destroyed his creation, and so he destroys most of the earth in a great flood. This leads us to Noah. There are all sorts of other stories in the Jewish traditions that we may or may not be familiar with. Another one is when God creates his covenant with Abraham. This is what the Jews consider very sacred. This is when God tells Abraham, one of the leaders of the Israelites, the Hebrews, that I am your God, and I am going to protect you and your people, and you are my chosen people. That's what the Israelites or the Jews believe, that God has chosen them, and they will be the ones to have God's favor in life. But they believe that they must also endure their suffering in order to ultimately receive God's favor. All of these early stories are written in the Torah. This is what the Jewish called their holy book. The Torah also has the first 5 books of the Christian Bible. So a lot of those stories that Christians learn when they are in Bible study or Bible school or Sunday school or whatever, they're also learning stories that are familiar to the Jews and stories that are the basis of the Jewish faith as well. Now, extremely important element of Jewish history and human history is the creation of the Ten Commandments. Many of you are probably familiar with the Ten Commandments. Think about Hammurabi's Code. Okay, why was that so important? When we had laws being written down in early Mesopotamia, that really changed the way that humans function. The same goes for the Ten Commandments and the Jewish people. When they write down their laws, these laws they believe are ordained by God, when they write down their laws, that gives people a set of rules to live by, a way to keep their actions in line. Now, in the Ten Commandments, it's a way to keep your actions in line with God. But of course, it's also just helping humans function as a society. Hey, don't kill each other. Hey, stop being jealous of everyone. Be nice to your parents because you were depending on your parents for survival in this time. Honor them, be thankful for them. So we see some kind of basic rules set up in the Ten Commandments. These laws are delivered by God to Moses. That is the Jewish story. If you want to see a clip from the Prince of Egypt, I've linked it. This is not actually the scene where God is delivering the Ten Commandments to Moses. I couldn't find that in the Prince of Egypt, but this is the scene where God first reveals himself to Moses in the burning bush. And this might help give you an idea of, okay, Moses is a central figure to the Jewish people, to the Jewish faith, and later to the Christian faith. He has been chosen by God to lead the Israelites in many ways. And one early way that he does this is when God gives Moses the Ten Commandments and tells Moses to deliver these laws to his people and for Moses to help keep the Israelites in line, basically, and tell them how to act. Now, the Ten Commandments have an unimaginable influence on human history because they create this standard for how people should live. So again, telling people and helping people understand how they should function is going to be a really key part of the Jewish faith and human history. So Jews, many people know this, Jews have many laws which they follow. The Ten Commandments are the most important, but in their other books, they had created quite an extensive list of laws that they live by. So they are very, as a people, they are very interested in keeping order and doing what is necessary in order to please God, in order to function as a society. And this really changes the way the world will work. So you've got a picture over there on the side of God having a covenant with Abraham. This is again when Abraham is asked by God to sacrifice his son. Abraham says that he will do it because he believes that God is the one true God. And God saves Abraham's son and says, do not sacrifice your son, but your faith has shown me that you are the person I want to lead my people. And that's when he makes his covenant. There you've got an image of basically the fake Ten Commandments. That is not what the Ten Commandments looked like. They were certainly not written in English on some tablets, but they were probably carved into stone. That is the thought there. Okay, so a little bit more about Jewish history. So keeping in line with Moses and Moses' storyline. So again, Moses had been a young man. He was set free basically by his mother. His mother had to give Moses up, I should say. This is where he is put in the Nile and he's floating away. And he's eventually rescued by the Pharaoh and the Pharaoh's family. And Moses grows up to be very powerful. But all throughout this time, Moses is an Israelite. He is Jewish. He is not like the Egyptians, but the Israelites were captive in Egypt. They were enslaved. They've been enslaved for years, for generations. The Jews had been slaving away at Egyptian works in the Egyptian hierarchy. They were building massive Egyptian structures because they were enslaved. And Moses is the person that grows to be the chosen one by God to lead these people out of Egypt. Let my people go, said Moses, and we are going to the promised land, said Moses. And this is the very famous scene. You can also click on this here, this link, when Moses is going across the Red Sea. He's parting the Red Sea with the help of God, and he's leading the Israelites out of captivity. Again, let my people go. Take us to the promised land. God had promised land to the Hebrews or the Israelites. He had said, you are my people. I will protect you. I am giving you a place to go, and that place will be Israel. Eventually, Moses leads his people after a very long and arduous journey out of slavery in Egypt. They are able to reach the promised land. They go to Israel and they create their capital at Jerusalem. And this city is still standing today, and many of the archaeological ruins of ancient Jerusalem can still be seen when you go visit Israel. So they have created their home now in Israel. We get the term Israelites. Israel means one who wrestles with God. So Israel as a country, or as a group of people at this time, before it's a country, I should say. So Israel as a group of people, they're constantly conquered, even when they escape captivity. That doesn't mean it's the end for them. That's unfortunately not the end result. They're continually conquered and exiled as a people. One example of this is when they are sent again out of Israel into Babylon. Babylon is one of those city-states in Mesopotamia. Recognize that name. And the Babylonians conquer the Jewish people, and they enslave them once again and send them into Babylon. And now we have another example of the Israelites being persecuted and sent away. This slow spread of Jewish people across areas is called the diaspora. A diaspora basically means that, a spread of people. Another example of this, in addition to the Jewish people, is African peoples during the time of the slave trade. So there are lots of cultural studies and historical studies now of the African diaspora. When in the 16, 17, and 1800s, thousands of slaves were taken from Africa, particularly West Africa, and sent all around the world. So now there are different people of African descent with African descended cultures living all around the world. This is the diaspora of the Africans. There is also very famously a diaspora of the Jews. The Jews have constantly lived for 4,000 years basically in a series of exile, in a series of diaspora. So if I were to ask you a famous example of when the Jews were persecuted and sent out of their homeland, most people would say the Holocaust, which is a very true example. Jews had been persecuted for years, 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 years. This is the argument when, after the Second World War, the state of Israel is created as a permanent homeland, finally, for the Jewish people because they had been forced to live elsewhere for so many years. Now, ultimately, a last key belief of the Jews is that they, and this is in their religious text and in their teachings, they believe that a Messiah eventually will come and appear to lead them to their freedom, to their complete safety, to their eventual security with God, with their one true God. Now, for Christians, and for early Christians particularly, people that were formerly Jews, they were living in a way where they believed, yes, at some point someone is going to come save us, a Messiah. So when Jesus comes, many people believed he was the Messiah. Other Jews did not believe that Jesus was the Messiah. And if you are Jewish today, you still do not believe that Jesus was the Messiah. These Jews are still waiting on a Messiah to come and save them. Okay, so last thing that we can kind of quickly go through is that Judaism is spread through people living in new places as they're sent around. And we see this in many ways in artifacts from the Roman Empire, actually. So you can see in this image, they've got a menorah. That is because Romans allowed people to practice religious freedom. They could practice whatever religion they wanted for many times. And you can see over here how Judaism is spreading. It starts, again, Middle East. Jerusalem is the capital. They are spreading around Think about the trade that's occurring at this time. Think about also that Israelites are being sent to live in other places and have moved elsewhere because of their diaspora. And that is also spreading Jewish culture and the Jewish faith.